On October 27, 2025, CT169Strong presented a webinar on the environment, preservation, and open space amid development pressure in Connecticut, moderated by Alexis Harrison, a Fairfield, Connecticut Planning and Zoning Commissioner, with CT169Strong panelists, Kathryn Braun, an environmental and land attorney and Fairfield Planning and Zoning Commissioner, and Maria Weingarten, a member of New Canaan's Board of Finance and Affordable Housing Committee, and guest panelists Steve Trinkhaus, a consulting civil engineer specializing in low-impact sustainable development, and Dan Lent, an attorney and candidate for first selectman in Easton, Connecticut.
Great. I will get things going right now. Good evening. Welcome. My name is Alexis Harrison. I am part of CT169Strong. What is our group? We've been around for over 5 years now, and we are a grassroots organization that analyzes and disseminates information on pending legislation, specifically to usually housing and zoning bills that could really hurt your town's ability to make land use decision making and planning. Tonight we have a really great forum. We're lucky to have guests who are experts in environmental protection and stormwater and a lot of other issues that we normally don't talk about on our CT169 webinars. So we're really lucky to have such a great panel. I'm going to start with Steve Trinkhaus, who's here tonight. He is an engineer who has lectured around the world on low impact development and as an expert in both developing and assessing stormwater drainage systems to ensure they function properly and they don't cause harm to the environment. We also have Dan Lent. Dan Lent is an intellectual property attorney. He's a former member of the Easton Conservation Commission. He served on the Sewage Working Group on the Commission on Connecticut's Development and Future. And he's also running for first selectman in the town of Easton, where he grew up and lives. We also have Kathryn Braun, a member of the Fairfield P&Z Commissioner with myself, and who's also an attorney. And last but not least, we have Maria Weingarten, co-founder of CT169Strong, and she's also a member of the New Canaan Board of Finance, Affordable Housing Committee, is a former auditor at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and now a realtor. So we have a really great panel tonight. I do want to talk, we will be talking about environmental protection. We've seen it kind of go by the wayside when we look at these bills that are really pro-development. So we want to bring it to the table tonight and really dissect some of the issues that could be going on when you have all this development pressure. But first, I do want to turn over to Maria Weingarten, who's been in the know about all the legislative activities happening. Just to backtrack, back in June, Governor Lamont rightfully vetoed a mega housing bill that we saw that would really disempower our local zoning commissions. And but as promised, legislative leaders are going to be bringing it back probably in November for a special session. Maria, do you have any update on what's going on with the bill?
Sure, I'm happy to lead it off here. So we're hearing that there is some kind of a bill, but what we're also hearing is that that bill has been completely embargoed. So the only ones who have it are the Democrats, who are in the majority, who have a copy of the bill, and it is not being shared with the minority leadership. It is not being shared with those who are on the committees of cognizance, which is at least planning and development and the housing committee. So those minority representation leaders have not been provided any of the information about it. So, as a resident, your largest asset that you own likely is your home. And here you have legislators who are keeping what is being decided that may impact your homes, and they're hiding the ball. And again, they're looking to potentially have this in a special session. Special sessions do not have hearings. They last maybe 1 to 2 days. They've said November 12th to November 14 as the penciled in dates for a potential hearing. And they have not even stated yet what is going to be the topics that are going to be addressed during that meeting. So these are concerns that I think that we all should engage with. And I think that as residents, our call to action is that we have updated our petition on our website, and we will be sending that out to everyone and letting you know how you can send the quick petition. And it says essentially to not do such a thing where you don't have the engagement of residents, when you don't have public hearings, when you have a quick bill that's done in this manner, you are bound to have errors. We already saw the bill that passed within 1 week had numerous inconsistencies and errors within it. So we are recommending that everybody send this petition out and make sure that you get in touch with Lamont, the majority leadership, and let them know, and your own legislators in your municipality, and ask them how they intend to vote on this bill, should there be some housing related bill that's coming to the floor. And ask them if they've seen the bill, because clearly everyone else has not been party to that and have not had a seat at the table.
Yeah, and from what we've gathered too, and as many of you probably have read, these negotiations on the bill have actually happened in the darkness. So they've not seen the light of the day. So it's really this closed group of individuals who are doing this behind the scenes, which is never good. It's never good to do the people's business behind the closed doors. Before we proceed, I did want to call out, we have some legislators on the line. I know we have State Rep Mark Anderson, Patrick Callahan, State Rep Tina Corpus, and I believe State Rep Mitch Belinsky. So we're really glad that you're here tonight. And I know a number of people who are part of, their local land use boards or volunteers. So really glad to have such a great group tonight. So Kathy, I'm going to turn over to you. And again, this is a free-for-all conversation. So Steve and Dan, feel free to jump in. I guess at a high level, Kathryn, can you tell us, are zoning commissions, are they doing enough to protect our watersheds? I've read that, they actually have the power to create ordinances or regulations to protect them, but they're actually falling flat on this promise. So can you talk a little more about that?
I think the zoning commissions need more education and more technical expertise within their commissions. That's one thing. They also need to know that they're the advocates for environmental protection. We in Connecticut, we have wetlands agencies in every town. They go under different names. Fairfields is called the Conservation Commission, and they're supposed to carry out wetlands protection laws, but they're strictly restricted to wetlands and watercourses or a buffer area around them called the upland review area. So that leaves it to the zoning commission to take care of everything outside of the wetland or the upland review area of the wetland. And frankly, I think there's also overlap. I think we can also protect area within that upland review area if we have to. So I think zoning commissions need better education. They need better training on what our advocacy role should be in protecting the environment. And you have to have people on the commission that are willing to take a stand. Whenever we hear from applicants on what they are doing, and we don't hear an expert such as Mr. Trinkhaus on the other side, you only hear positive reviews. Then when you hear somebody who has expertise, there's all kinds of problems. And that's just on an application. In terms of planning, which would be passing a regulation to protect the watershed, I don't think we're doing it at all, frankly. My commission, which Ms. Harrison sits on, has approved multiple applications which get close to both inland wetlands and tidal wetlands. And while inland wetlands are governed by the Conservation Commission, tidal wetlands are under our jurisdiction. And we recently approved a project within 15 feet of a tidal wetland up by the Circle Hotel. So why we did it, I don't know. We recently also approved something in the flood zone down on Reef Road. So I think we need better education and better advocacy training to be able to do that. As far as exactly what the watershed protection should be, I would leave that up to Mr. Trinkhaus or Mr. Lent, who probably know more about the watershed, because I know Easton, where Mr. Lent is from, is basically a watershed town. It's got 7 reservoirs in it, supplies water to 11 communities, including Bridgeport, Stratford, and a whole bunch of others, as well as New York State. So they can talk more about exactly watershed protection, what should be done.
Yeah. Mr. Trinkhaus, did you want to add?
Yeah, a couple things. Kathy's exactly right on education. And it's not just planning and zoning commissions, it's the wetlands agencies also. There's a disconnect that many wetland commissions do not feel they can review stormwater management. But if water is ultimately going to a wetland or watercourse, even if it's in the outside the upland review, they clearly have jurisdiction over that. And then planning and zoning, because most of the zoning regs have stormwater standards in them, also get a second bite at the apple. What is missing from both sets of regulations is many towns simply are looking at what we call zero increase in the peak rate of runoff, where you match the pre-development rate of runoff for a bunch of storms for post-development conditions. What that ignores is the increase in runoff volume that's created by buildings and parking lots and roadways, and also the water quality aspects of non-point source pollutants that, from parking lots, you have metals, hydrocarbons, you have sediment, you have nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, which come from simply atmospheric deposition. I mean, what's going on right now is landing on your roof. You don't see it, but when it rains, it washes off. And all of these non-point source pollutants can adversely affect the environment, particularly, in the reservoirs. Having grown up in Reading, I'm, very familiar with Easton, with, having gone to Barlow with many of the kids, and I know the reservoirs. And, but the water quality and the volume standards are what's missing in land use regulations, and they really need to be brought to the forefront to avoid problems down the road.
Dan, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would just add, I agree. I think some of the problems are that, like in Easton, we have a 5-member committee. You don't have to be an engineer or a scientist. In fact, we have someone who's, has no technical background, or you have a real estate agent. So I think, first of all, like any other, professional, pursuit, you should have some minimal level of scientific qualification. And then, even if you don't, you should just look at the zoning regs. And I feel like, you have to follow the zoning regulations. And if you just start out at the beginning, they say things like the purpose is to protect the quality of surface water and the groundwater resources in the town of Easton. That's one of their charges. And, more often than not, you never hear them start at the beginning and say, okay, what are we allowed to do, and what is our mission? What is our, what is the direction that the regulations give us? Instead, they just sort of come in almost as if they don't have to follow that. And I think that's a big problem. So I think they need to, because another huge issue is that they're a quasi judicial body. So they have a lot of power. They almost take the place of the Superior Court. And they're extremely powerful. So, in our town, they've often ignored the citizens. Now there's a ban on public comment. We used to have that for 20 years. So you basically have a dictatorship, and the only way to fight them is through lawsuits. So I think I also agree with experts. The applicants in these applications need to pay, as part of their application fee, for a third-party neutral expert selected by the town. And I think, that isn't always done. And that's another really important thing. So I think just basically keeping the zoning board on mission and to follow their own regulations would solve a lot of the problems, because they go far afield, and say you have a real estate agent or someone on there, and they just start, saying, oh, it would be nice to have a store or whatever, and they're not really doing their job, which is laid out very clearly in the zoning regulations.
Or some come with a social agenda, as we've seen. So yeah, I totally appreciate what you're saying. And I just, to the audience, if you have questions, again, this is a open conversation. Feel free to drop questions in as you see. And I just want to take a step back and go back to the housing bills that we've seen now for, I think, 5 sessions. And I've noticed a lot of environmental or kind of green groups glom onto these bills, but I don't also see any of these bills really exempt land that's already restricted by easement, water company, class 1 and 2 lands. Like, that should really be preserved. So are we kind of not, are they not doing their jobs? And I don't say that in a disrespectful way. I just want to understand why we're seeing green groups coalesce with development groups. Kathy,
I'll
do you
let
want
Maria
to?
go first. and
Well,
then I'll add
I
on.
guess we are hearing that there is some investment by some of these organizations into like the Conservation League and in some other things. So there is some cross-pollination that's happening between them, where funding resources are being provided. So, and I think there is this thought that it's a progressive and helpful for minorities, and in some way that they're sort of conflating the idea for assisting minorities, and then that is an okay justification to let go of some of these important supports and controls and protections for our environment. And I think that should be alarming to everybody who cares about the environment. We want to make sure that we do good things, and our towns are thoughtfully planning. But that's not a green, an open season to just change everything and to override all of your local zoning. So I think it's very important that we do the protections that are needed.
I think if you use almost the law, the much maligned law 8-30G is kind of an example. It was passed 35 years ago with a very laudable goal of expanding affordable housing. And there wasn't enough, and especially in the suburbs. So it was passed, and what it does is it hamstrings the zoning commissions. It ties their hands to basically both hands behind their back. So it not only prevents them from using their own regulations to protect the environment, but no regulations can be used. Height, setback, coverage, open space, preservation, parking, nothing. None of them can be used. But it also flips the burden of proof when it goes to court on appeal against the commission. Usually, if you appeal a decision you don't like, whoever you are, you could be a neighbor or the applicant, the burden's on you. You have to prove they made a horrible error. But it's completely reversed on this one law. And when the law was passed, they didn't want to lose the green support. They didn't want to have opposition from the green groups. So they exempted wetlands laws from the reach of this law. And that kind of exemplifies the issue here, because when you have such a pro-development law, or the bills that Maria's talking about now, and you have the lobbying of New York-based development community teaming up with housing advocates who are do-gooders, they want to have housing for disadvantaged people. That is a laudable goal. Teaming up with them, and then also teaming up with a lot of green groups that I've contributed to my whole life, and I've stopped with some of them because I think they've conflated their mission. That's a very powerful lobby, and I think what loses out is the environment. Open space preservation. If you lose open space, that's all you got. They're not making any more land, okay? And by the way, land is not partisan. Whatever the party is that's doing this, that's in power, it's happened under both parties. So I would say when you start at the top with the governor and go on down through state senators, state representatives, if they're not representing their community and working to effectuate bills which preserve open space and do not emphasize development above all else, and then it goes right down to the local level. Who's on your conservation commission? And that's what Dan was talking about. Who's on your zoning commission? Are they approving projects that they don't have to approve? Fairfield just approved a project on Reef Road that could be inundated under 8 feet of water if another Hurricane Sandy comes in. We had the DEP send a letter saying, don't do it. You're putting human life at risk. It was an 8-30G, but it was also a coastal site plan application, which is a separate law, which I don't think they had to go under the 8-30G standard. But so from the top down, you have a whole context of extreme development advocacy.
Right.
And the environment loses out. That's my point.
Right.
Every
And for our listeners, I have a good example. When you talk to these lobbyists, who in many cases are paid by outside developers, they push theories that don't stand up to scrutiny. One of them is that the maximum lot size in Connecticut should be 1 acre maximum. So they want to not let anyone own a house with more than 1 acre of land. And you hear that and you're like, well, how can that be? And the reason is they came up with a theory and they say you are privatizing parkland. Now, I don't understand that logically, but it's just a good example of they with a straight face, they make these arguments that literally make no sense at all. And you can see it's just pro developers spinning the narrative. And I think, some legislation is illegal and you have to, litigate illegal legislation. But I mean, I always think about the takings clause, but you know that so far that hasn't worked. But I mean, they seriously are taking your fundamental property rights that's guaranteed in the case law when they come up with theories like this, that they're deciding that no one in Connecticut should be able to have a house with more than 1 acre, and they're serious about it, and they're saying you're bad and you're wrong because you own, say, 3 acres. And they say it with a straight face. And I don't think people realize that those are the kinds of arguments that, you know, our legislatures are listening to. And
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah.
Can I
I'd like
ask
to
Mr.
add to-
Trinkhaus to
I was
talk
actually,
about?
I was just,
Yeah.
yeah, and go ahead. Sorry, no, I didn't mean to cut you off, Dan.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Anyway,
No, I actually would like to weigh in on Dan and some of the questions
Yeah.
that have come up. You know, I mean, my former town of Reading, which was mostly 2 acre zoning back in the 1960s when my mother was actually on zoning, was threatened with a federal lawsuit of discriminatory zoning because everything was 2 acre zoning except for a small area down Georgetown. You know, zoning, is to protect really the land. You know, in Easton, a lot of the soils in the town of Easton, and you have many farms there, are great for farming, but they're not good for septic systems. And septic suitability is what really controls development, not the acreage of a given parcel. I know Candy's Farm, I believe it is, which is opposite Staples. I mean, it's beautiful, flat top of the hill, grows wonderful crops because it has high organic soils, has a shallow groundwater table, which is what crops love. But when you go to put a septic system there, that's really contrary to a long-term functionality of the system. Having done 8-30G both for developers and also oppose them, wetlands is the best venue to oppose an 8-30G because the law does not come into play there. One comment is from Westport is the WPLO, which is the Waterway Protection Line Ordinance, exempted from 8-30G. Well, it doesn't apply because that's a wetland agency. 8-30G only affects the planning and zoning side, but does not affect the WPLO Commission, which is called Flood and Erosion, or the Conservation Commission in Westport. The key is, and again, I've had, done work for many different clients, and we do environmentally sensitive plans, even under 8-30G that, provide green space, provide, don't trash the site, work with the landform. So it can be done. But the key is also addressing the stormwater, and many high density projects, there's little to no room to do that. The last question I think I'd like to address is from Mel Young. PA 490 is a statutory language. It allows you to put land in basically forest protection where you pay lower taxes on it. We actually had a subdivision years ago in Winchester, Connecticut, where after we got approval, we kept 3 lots to market and we put the rest of the 100-acre site in PA 490 simply to lower the tax bill because the market was heading downhill in 07 and 08. So it does protect the land. It has to be kept that way for 10 years. If you pull it out before that, I believe you owe the back taxes on it, but it is a good way, even for an approved subdivision, to protect the land, until the market perhaps comes around. I'll leave the question about repeal 8-30G to the lawyers on it.
exactly.
I mean, the problem I have with 8-30G is, it's only a 30% set aside. You will never catch up in your community. That's the short answer. If you do 10 units, or let's do 9 units, easier math, 3 are affordable, 6 are market rate. So now you just added 6/10 of a unit, to your list. So you'll never catch up. It doesn't matter. I have had clients that have actually gone way beyond. They've done 50 or 60% of affordable units simply because they truly believe in providing that, and even to lower income levels. So, there are people that are responsible developers under 8-30G.
Absolutely. That's
And
great
New
to hear.
Canaan as a town has been doing that. We've been building 100% forever affordable for that very reason. And that it doesn't disappear. That's the other part I have a problem with 830G is that most projects, you have to get it for the math to work, to get the financing. They have to be able to realize their profit within that 40-year window. So you've already realized your profit. So why are we eliminating the affordability requirement? It's just creating generational wealth for the developer in the long run. So, I mean, I would suggest that, at a minimum, Stanford has a 99-year, my understanding, affordability requirement that maybe that should be implemented statewide instead, if that's, a better idea going forward.
Yeah.
Dan, there is a question about what you were talking about earlier about the takings clause. Regarding takings, what if an 830G development results in declining nearby home values? Would that have any kind of action that landowners can do, homeowners can do?
Well, so far it's been a tough argument in the courts, but I thought it's worth mentioning, and it does tie directly into our zoning regulations. If you look at our zoning regulations, one of the first things it says the planning and zoning is charged with doing is preserving your property values. It says that clear as day. So the idea that planning and zoning like in Easton, I've never heard them talk about preserving property values in their deliberations, and it's one of the basic charges. So the question is right on. You have to preserve property values to be in compliance with our zoning, and if your decisions are going to reduce property values, you can't really do that unless there's some compelling reason. So as far as the takings clause, I looked at that with a lawyer who was doing an 830G in near New Haven, and he said, yeah, so far that hasn't been a winner, but it's one of those things. It really gets down to the concept. If you want to Google Euclidean zoning, and which is not a bad thing. It's our fundamental property law idea where a town can decide what the good kind of zoning is, and it's established in the case law, and there's plenty of case law too. There was a case in California in the fundamental you learned in property class where it said that someone who moved to a town wanted to move to a town, but they didn't have enough money to live there, sued, and the judge said, well, no, you're perfectly able to move to the town once you can afford it. But then, and that was fine for many, many years. And then there was the Mount Laurel decision in New Jersey, which sort of started to force all this to happen. But I mean, the property law is long, and it's been around for a long time. And these ideas are relatively new. So, I mean, a lot of the things they're proposing, I really think won't survive tests in the court, because they basically are illegal.
Yeah, thank you. Steve, a question now to you from our friend Dana Benson.
Oh,
He's
okay.
a question in the chat about, can you comment on the problems with various community septic systems and mini
Yeah.
wastewater treatment
Yeah,
plants?
in the state of Connecticut, there's really 3 levels of septic jurisdiction. For systems that are less than 2,000 gallons a day, it stays with your local health department, or in the case of Easton, the Aspetuck Health District. Systems that are between 2,000 and 7,500 gallons a day stay with the state health department. And the only difference under the state versus the local jurisdiction is, instead of a 18-inch separation of groundwater from the bottom of the system, it's a 24-inch separation. Other than that, the design is basically the same. When you get over 7,500 gallons a day, and I believe it's going to go up to 10,000 is going to be the threshold instead of 75, you're into the Connecticut DEP or Connecticut DEEP standards. Under Connecticut DEP, instead of a very prescriptive code that we have for the state health department, it's a performance-based approach. So the soil testing is much more involved. You have to do groundwater monitoring, and the system is basically designed based on equations, to make sure this hydraulically works in the field. And it's a much more involved process. It can take you perhaps a year or two to get the monitoring data, depending on how much rainfall we have. The wet period we have to monitor is from February to May. And if you don't have a good snow year and you don't have rain, DEP can say, go do it another year. But while they look at big systems, they also look at where you have a single site and you may have multiple systems. If the aggregate wastewater flow is greater than the 7,500, then it's under their jurisdiction, even though you have 60 individual systems as an example. The other aspect is where you have a bunch of homes, again, 60 homes, but you have one big system. And I would use Staples Elementary School. You've got a big school there. They have a DEP system. It's a big sand pile, on the top of the hill there. So there's two different ways that DEP can have jurisdiction, either a simply flow rate overall that's more than 7,500, or you're connecting multiple buildings to a single system. Right now in the wastewater management section at DEP, there is not one professional engineer in that department reviewing plans. And that's a problem because as an engineer, under my license, I'm entitled to a peer review. That's a review by another engineer. If there's no engineer there, that's a real problem. And based on a couple recent experiences with that department, I'm less than impressed with the staff that's up there right now. They really do not have the technical expertise that they need to. What engineers can also do is design treatment plants. And I think Staples may have one of these. It's a pre-treatment plant that reduces certain constituents in the effluent to make the system function better over a long term, primarily reducing nitrogen before it's discharged to the field. So, that's a mechanical system. It needs somebody to own and operate it. There's maintenance requirements. There's also reporting requirements. So, there's many ways to do it. But the bottom line is, while you can engineer many of these systems, if you have enough money, you can build them. The broader question is, should the town put them in certain areas? One engineer that I helped with a project in Guilford, basically the site was blasted rock and they were building a 20-foot tall sand pile with a treatment plant, to make this system work. And the system's going to be in excess of $5 million. And again, I disagree kind of with that. I think, while you can build things, you really need to look at the broader environmental impact about what you're doing.
This goes to, yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Kathy.
This kind of goes to what Maria was saying. The bills that are always being proposed are always seeking to expand, or I guess reduce the approval level needed for a larger communal septic, and to also try to encourage or maybe force towns to expand their sewer system, because where you have sewer, you can have development. And it's all about adding multifamily development. That's what all these bills are focused on, right, Maria? And even there's some lawsuits in New Canaan that I've looked at where right now a town cannot be forced to expand a sewer line to satisfy an 8-30G developer, because that is under the sewer commission, which is not the zoning commission. So zoning is the only one bound by 8-30G, meaning we can't follow our own regulations. But if there's a wetland, or in Fairfield it's WPCA, Water Pollution Control Authority, if it's the sewer commission, that's not bound by that law. So they can follow their own rules and deny a permit. If you don't have a sewer permit or a wetlands permit, you can't build. So even if zoning approved under 8-30G, because they have a very hard road, to follow to not approve, they still can't build if they don't get a wetlands permit or a sewer permit. But the bills that are always pending that we've been looking at for the last few years, they're constantly trying to loosen up those regulations to allow larger communal-based septic, which itself, to me, presents a risk to the environment. And all of you, chime in on that.
Yeah,
Right.
I would 100% agree with that. That's
Yeah.
exactly what their motivation is. It's whatever way. If you looked at the recent bill, it was about eliminating parking requirements, so that you don't have to require parking. Anything they can do to really reduce the cost of development on a developer, to increase density so they have more units that they can spread the cost of their land on. That's really the intention here, is multifamily development. But if you look at the actual need, or where we've been lacking when they talk about Connecticut having a lack of housing, what's really lacking, and the tightest market we have is the single family, is not the multifamily market here in Connecticut.
Right. And I'll just add, I mean, public safety seems to really not be important. For example, firefighters used to make regulations for the number of staircases in buildings. Now they're having non-firefighters say, you know what, you don't need that second staircase that we've had forever. And they're making, these apartment buildings more unsafe because they want them to be cheaper. So you're taking the word of people with no training and saying, here, you don't need that staircase, and it reminds you of the tenements in New York City and all the problems that they had, unsafe. We have these fire regulations for a reason. Another example, just to color if you're new to this, I joined Democratic State Senator Christine Cohen's sewage working group, which was part of the Economic Development Committee. And there was a couple of scientists, but not really any. It was a big group, and it was mostly real estate people and people who wanted to develop. And I very quickly realized that their goal, they had an agenda, a hidden agenda, and we weren't really there to discuss anything. We were there to just push their agenda, which was to reduce all the septic regulations so that it would be easier to build. And for example, Steve was talking about the 7,500 gallon per day. They were going to sort of change the definitions of things, change the definition of large and small. And that's, you can't do that. So now suddenly they're going to allow 10,000 gallons, where before it was 7,500. So they realized that the septic tank and the public safety regulations were slowing them down in court, and for example, the wetlands laws. And so they're just
Oops.
I think, Dan,
Okay.
we lost your video.
Well, well, Dan may be off. I'll weigh in a little bit. Um, last July, July of 25, the state health department was supposed to take jurisdiction of systems under 10,000 gallons a day. And then DEP now wants to throw under the state health department what we call alternative technology systems, or AT systems for short. These are systems that are little mini prepackaged plants that homeowners can use. They use them a lot in Rhode Island in the coastal environment to greatly reduce nitrogen before it goes to a leaching field, very close to the tidal resources, because nitrogen's a major pollutant in the tidal world. And this DEEP does not like the AT systems because it allows people to, perhaps in the coastal environment, fix their septic systems instead of forcing sewers on them. This occurred in both Madison and Branford years ago, two towns that fought DEP over sewering. And when the groups wanted to use AT systems, DEEP basically was very upset, to be nice about it. But the state health department and Matt Pollock and his one other partner, there's just two guys to handle the entire state. There used to be three, now there's just two. And quite honestly, while they're very hardworking, and they're engineers, these systems are a much higher level of expertise. You need people that have designed them to be able to review them. And that's one of the other problems that we have. One of the other neighbors, Paula, asked a question about forcing a higher level of education on commissions. I've done, back in 09 or 08 to 09, when it was the economic downturn, I was approached by several communities to do talks on low impact development. And then their budgets got zeroed out, so they couldn't hire me. And I basically said, you're interested in it, I'm going to do the talk. You buy refreshments and things like that for the attendees. But we tried to educate land use commissions in several Connecticut towns on stormwater impacts. I've done that to the Fairfield Wetlands Commission one night at the end of one of their meetings for maybe an hour or so. there's plenty of opportunities, for commissioners to learn, but it's not coming out of DEP. While they have training for wetlands a couple years ago, well, maybe more than a couple, I had talked to Darcy Withers, who is in wetlands at DEP, about doing LID talks, and that would be great, great, and it just never heard from them again. So there's private, avenues, but it's really hard, to get the education out there. There has to be a driver within the municipality, typically in the land use office, to go forward and bring educators in like myself, so the commissions can learn and they can make better decisions.
Yeah, and actually, there was a law that was passed a few years ago, which does require land use commissioners to have 4 hours of training their first year of office. And Kathy and I, as zoning commissioners, have done that before, and some of it is really informative, but many times we are steered towards these very pro-development lectures by land use attorneys, some attorneys who have actually crafted the 830G law. But we absolutely could use a stormwater lesson or two and understand the stormwater manual. So I think that is a lost opportunity. Go ahead, Kath.
It's disappointing that like zoning, right? We have to have continuing ed now for I don't know how many credits every other year, but there's no requirement on who presents that. It should be an official academic institution, or UConn has an organization that offers courses, but sometimes you have lobbying groups such as Desegregate Connecticut offering the training sessions, and it's quite biased. I took one of them once. So I feel like we need technical expertise, technical know-how. How does a stormwater system work? I mean, if Steve Trinkhaus or somebody does not come and testify, we have no friggin' idea if it's going to work or not. If he doesn't testify, I think it's going to work. How do I know? One of the applications, they put a rain garden on top of an infiltrator system. How would anyone know? It sounds beautiful. A rain garden on top of an infiltrator system. Steve said that doesn't work. Don't do that. But he wasn't testifying in that case. So those are the things you don't know. It sounds beautiful, but you don't know it. So if you don't have someone technical on your commission, and you don't have an engineering department that has the expertise or the time to do a deep dive, and they don't have the time to do a deep dive into it. If we need to be able to hire our own, and we haven't done that yet. And we need training so we can emphasize what needs to be done, even if we don't have the technical expertise.
Yeah. And Dan, we did
And
lose you,
what's this-
so welcome back.
Oh
Do you
yeah,
want to jump back in?
sorry. Yeah,
That's
I
okay.
apologize. I just wanted to add too about the sewers that, in Trumbull, it's a big issue. And now we have this Plum Tree project, which may be about 60 apartments under 830G. There's a single family house there now. They're gonna tear it down, build this huge apartment building, and it's right next to the Mill River, right up the hill from it, basically touches the Mill River. So it's a terrible location, but they're saying, well, we're going to tie it to the Trumbull sewers. Well, the Trumbull sewers are having trouble with their contract with Bridgeport. And then what happened was, I'm very involved in Black Rock Harbor, and Black Rock Harbor has a big sewage discharge problem where every time it rains hard, the untreated sewage goes into the harbor from the West Side treatment plant, which is really outdated. And so we activists filed Clean Water Act citizen suits, and we made them upgrade that plant. It's not really upgraded at all yet. And so as it currently stands, that plant can't really handle the sewage that it has. And simple things like if people throw baby wipes down their toilet, it can clog a whole sewage treatment plant with something as simple as that. And then on the West Side case in Black Rock Harbor, the pipe where it discharges comes right out under Captain's Cove under the office. And it was supposed to have been built by the contractor to run all the way out into Long Island Sound. But if you talk to Bruce Williams or the people down there, they'll tell you the story how the contractor cut corners and didn't complete the pipe. So now the pipe comes out into Black Rock Harbor underneath Captain's Cove. It never was supposed to do that. So you have a terrible system to begin with. and it affects Fairfield because what Fairfield Beach closes quite a few times during the year because of the high level of sewage. And you can look at Save the Sound; they have reports on it. But you know, it's a terrible system now. Trumbull sewage, I think a lot of people don't know that Trumbull sewage goes there. It does, and so it's not a panacea to tie 30 new apartments into the Trumbull sewers, because you don't live in an existential vacuum. You have to understand the whole system. And it's just not a good idea if it's not working now to keep loading more sewage into it. And I think that Black Rock Harbor is a great example. Um, it's really terrible until they get it done, and that's not going to be done for maybe 8 years or 10 years until they do it. So it's a big problem, and it's all interrelated.
Thank you.
I was
just want-
pointing out,
Oh,
no.
go ahead, Kathy.
I was just pointing out, just before we got started tonight, we were having a casual discussion that the population, how much and how fast we want it to grow. Because a lot of these bills are pushing density. And what we just did our 10-year plan, the plan of conservation and development in our town, the zoning commissions of each town are obligated to update it every 10 years. Ours is due next year. We did it this year. We worked on it for a few years. But in the process of going forward with that, we learned that statistically, the state of Connecticut is only growing at about 1% in a decade. Fairfield County is growing at 4%. Neither of those sound like very high, but we're growing at 4 times the state average. How fast do we want our population to grow? And how much do we want it to grow? And it seems like Fairfield County is sort of, and zoning in Fairfield County is demonized all the time by, I don't know, having too much green areas. I don't know. But and on the other side, our Governor Lamont, has said a few times, we need more population in the cities. It seems like a lot of these bills and a lot of the lobbying is to just build in the suburbs. It's more lucrative, I imagine. But the cities need population. They have the infrastructure, right? So that's sort of an overarching theme I have with all the bills that are being pushed and what Dan is talking about with sewer. We don't have the sewer, even in Bridgeport, to handle all this growth. So I don't know where that goes.
Right, and the really sad thing is, if you've talked to people who've lived in Connecticut for a long time, Bridgeport used to be a beautiful city. It was a
Yeah.
great place to grow up. You've talked to the older people in your community who grew up there. It was fantastic with Pleasure Beach and all this other stuff, and they really let it deteriorate. So my simple answer is, like, why don't we help Bridgeport get back to where it was? I mean, they seem to never talk about that. Instead,
Right.
that's never in the discussion. And it's such a shame, because Bridgeport really was a great city. Talk to someone who grew up there. They'll tell you how nice it was. So it really is a tragedy. And I just want to get back to the zoning regs too. Our Easton zoning regs, the first thing they say in the purpose is to prevent the overcrowding of land, to avoid the undue concentration of populations, to lessen congestion in the streets. So that's a key term: lessen congestion, right? Not add congestion, actually actively reduce the congestion. So, I mean, if we just follow our own zoning regulations, it really guides you in principle to what your goals should be. But I never see, just like any science, you have to start with the history, and at the beginning they don't start at the right starting place. And it's like that garbage in, garbage out concept in accounting. You have to start with your regulations, and you have to follow them.
Yeah, I'd like to I see the second half of Dana's question. If a community system is built and there's a homeowners association, towns that have a WPCA or similar body require what we call a sinking fund, that every time a unit is sold, there is a certain amount of money that's put in a bank book account that is held by the town. So if a pump system needs to have the pumps replaced, there's money to replace it. It never falls on the town to fix the system, but you have to have that sinking fund. If not, it will fall to the homeowners to fund the repair. and they can be, substantial. If these systems are $700,000-800,000, and you've got, say, 100 units, that's a pretty hefty assessment to replace your septic system. And following up Dan's points about baby wipes, baby wipes, flushable wipes never go down the toilet. Whether you're on septic or sewer, they don't decompose ever. The problem with sewer systems, Bridgeport, New Haven, these old systems, there's a lot of what we call I&I, inflow and infiltration into these lines. So when it rains, you're actually dealing with a lot of rainwater mixing with the sewage, which goes to the treatment plant and then overwhelms the capacity of the plant. And then they wind up having to discharge that little bit of dirty water directly into the Sound, which then gives you beach closures and other problems. So that's why a lot of the city systems like Bridgeport, where Trumbull is shooting their sewage to them, have other problems, and they're not an easy solution to fix. I mean, you either have to replace the lines, sometimes you can line them with a PVC liner, but neither option is inexpensive. But that's one of the bigger problems with the city sewer systems is, they were built years ago, and the pipes leak and it causes, excess flows that they have to deal with. There are ways, some major communities in the central part of the country have built large underground pipe systems, like 40-foot diameter big pipe systems, where the excess overflow goes, during the rainfall event, it's held and then pumped back up to the treatment plant when the plant has capacity to actually handle the flow. But you're talking millions of dollars for those types of systems. So the best thing, with, on-site septic systems is really the designer doing their homework, really evaluating the site correctly, and not overwhelming the site just because the numbers say you can. Under the state regulations, our code has changed a lot since the early 90s, to the point now where even if there was one project in Ridgefield that was proposing 2 buildings, each of 65 bedrooms, were actually 60 bedrooms in each building, on a site with 2 on-site septic systems, they're going to be effluent from 60 bedrooms and basically place it in an area of a length of 165 feet because of manipulations allowed and actually encouraged under the state health code. I took one look at this system and, told, the realtor who wanted me to get involved, I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. I said, this system, you're setting it up to fail. Even though it conforms to the code, it's going to overwhelm the site. And that's what engineers need to do. The code is a minimum. We have to go beyond the code to do what works environmentally. And unfortunately, I see this all the time where they just go to the code and they don't really look at the bigger picture. And engineers need to do it because our obligation is public health, safety, welfare under my license of what we call standard of care. And that's my obligation, not to a client, not to a project. And I think a lot of engineers need to reread their code of practice to start following that.
Wow, that's interesting. Kathy, did you want to add anything before we move on?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that just getting back to where we started the whole conversation, are we ending at 9? That's about 9 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so just where we started was with the housing bill that was vetoed by Governor Lamont, and he's been under, I believe, extraordinary political pressure to go back on that. We don't know what's in it because it's not being publicized. And the way this whole thing came about 6 months ago, it wasn't publicized then. Nobody saw it. It was a 1-page homelessness bill. Suddenly it morphed into a 90-page complicated bill covering everything. You're not allowed to have parking requirements for apartment buildings. It would impose a fair share allocation of affordable housing to be built in every town in the state based on a complicated yet to be determined formula, and a bunch of other things. Converting commercial unused space to residential as of right, meaning no public hearing. So basically, and many other things. But the theme behind it all, in my opinion, is forget about open space preservation, environmental protection. They could not have talked to an environmental expert to design any of the bills, including that housing bill. because everything is about development. So, in my opinion, and I don't know if it was in this bill, but it was in some bills. The environmental intervention statute was going to be watered down, where anyone in the state right now can raise environmental issues in any type of administrative proceeding, whether it's conservation, wetlands, sewer, the state, anywhere. They would water that down to make you have to live nearby to raise that environmental issue. And I've been using that statute, it's called 2028-19, for 25 years to raise environmental issues in all kinds of public hearings and matters. So it's very, very concerning, the political pressure that's being pushed right now to unveto the bill. We don't know what's going to be in it, but the way it came down the first time was really bad. And I'm worried about what's going to happen now and what it could do to our environmental protection. Be very careful what your representatives do. Support representatives that represent their constituents. It really, really is upsetting that our own representatives up in Hartford, they voted against it. It was voted out of the House and out of the Senate, but our 3 representatives voted against it. But then a couple of them went and on the down low told the governor, we don't want you to veto it. He vetoed it anyway. But now it's coming back. So I don't know where it all goes, but it's deeply concerning to me because open space preservation, historic preservation, tidal wetlands, inland wetlands, that's all going to go by the wayside. Sorry, I didn't turn my phone off.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I know before I know we are getting close to 9 o'clock. I want to be conscious of everybody's time.
Yeah.
I know, Dan, you're on a busy campaign schedule these days. Maria, did you want to talk about what Kathy was saying about the bill and just kind of next steps?
So just quickly, so what we have is the original bill 5002 that was vetoed rightly by the governor. It had as of right conversions up to 9 units, commercial to residential, anywhere statewide. It prohibited municipalities from enforcing a minimum off-street parking standard. So you could not require off-street parking for any development up to 24 units. In addition, which hasn't really been talked about a lot, is that no P&Z could have the right to deny any development just based solely on parking. I mean, think about that. I mean, that's the way the language read in the bill. So again, this might have been an error. Maybe that wasn't the intention. It also had fair share allocations that were onerous and that exceeded 20% for, I think it was 29 municipalities had over 20% of their housing stock as an allocation of fair shares. And again, those allocations are not based on what are these, your access to sewer, to water, to all of these natural resources, these infrastructure needs that we have. And there's this promise of, you'll be entitled to some small funding of some kind. The reality is the funding's just not coming. So you don't have the infrastructure to support this high density development that would have been expected statewide. And as was mentioned on this before, we've been underfunding. We've been not taking care of our cities. The places that actually do have infrastructure, do have actual transit, and those are the areas that should be they should stop the disinvestment in cities and make sure that those are properly funded and to make sure that they are kept up as needed. And then, they also said that cities towns that lose in an 830G appeal case, that a court can decide that if it's in bad faith, that the towns would be charged for that if they lose. But that same standard did not apply to any of the developers if they were not acting in good faith in a proposal that's brought forth. We've heard of situations where developers are putting 3 or 4 830G projects on one property and trying to push those projects through on one property because they know that a town is going to be in front of a moratorium and they're just trying to figure out how they can end run the system. This is showing that there is some bad faith out there and that could be on both sides. And so there's no way that we should be making presumptions that towns are acting in bad faith. And there are plenty of good examples out there of towns that are doing the right thing. So what can you do? What can our residents do right now? You can send a petition, tell the governor, this is not the way we want legislation done. We don't want a hide the ball process where all of a sudden in 2 days in November after the elections, that they're going to raise a bill that has not been vetted by the minority party, that's been embargoed only by the majority leadership, and probably even members of their own party haven't even seen it, likely, if they are not have not voted for the bill. So I encourage everybody to go and get in touch with your local representatives and tell them that you're paying attention, that you're watching to see how they are going to be voting on these issues. Maybe they're going to reduce the numbers, who knows? Maybe they're going to reduce some of these things to try to come to a negotiated agreement of some kind, who knows? But we haven't seen the bill. And until we see what's in the writing, I wouldn't trust it. So that's what I got so
Yeah,
far.
and we will be putting up a petition that will go to Governor Lamont and other folks on our website in the next day or so. So you can just click on it and it'll go right to them, just to
The
tell them that we
petition's
want.
up.
Oh, the
Petition's
petition's
up
okay,
already.
sorry. But we do want transparency. We want good policy for everybody, not just for developers. So I do want to thank Dan Lent. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Any last words before we part, Dan?
Yeah, I just want all of our listeners, please join Connecticut 169 Strong. They really are the leading group fighting this. I don't know where we would be if we didn't have them. It's a grassroots
Thank you.
organization, and they have accomplished so much. Alexis, Kathryn, and Maria, I mean, it really is amazing. And if you haven't joined or you haven't contributed, please at least get on their email. They have these petitions like they're talking about where it takes you 2 seconds, you open it, you click it, and it goes right there. They did it with the 5002. I sent that around to a lot of you, and it really makes a difference. As you can see, the governor vetoed the bill. There was so much pressure, and so many of the sort of radical things, like it was supposed to be a homeless bill, and they were going to let basically have homeless encampments on your kids' soccer fields and that kind of thing. And that when this all came to light, I think the governor was like, "Oh, there's certain things." I just he couldn't. It was so bad he couldn't even. He had to veto it. So I mean, and it's all because of Connecticut CT169 Strong mainly, and other. I don't know the other groups, but that's the one I'm the most familiar with, and that's
Thank
the
you.
most effective. So please support them.
You took the words out of my mouth. Thank you for that lovely endorsement and testimonial. And Steve Trinkhaus, what a great treat having you on. Your expertise is just really remarkable, and glad to have you part of the conversation tonight. You brought a great deal. So hopefully you'll
Thanks for
come
the
back.
opportunity. We're not going anywhere yet.
Yeah, we'll continue the conversation in the coming weeks. We'll have another webinar, I am sure, prior to the special session. So stay tuned for more. Thank you for everybody for joining. Thank you.
Please stay abreast of what is happening with land use legislation in Hartford at CT169Strong.org and support our efforts to mobilize grassroots action in support of local control of zoning and land use. And thank you for tuning in.